Hello, and welcome to this episode of Red Watch TV. Today, we're going to be infiltrating the secretive world of Vladimir Putin's Siloviki. Silaviki, which translates to English as people of force, is the inner circle of ultranationalist hardliners that surround the Russian president. We're going to be meeting the autocrats, oddballs, and conspiracy theorists who are shaping contemporary Russian and global politics. With their roots firmly in the security and intelligence establishments, they set the political discourse that dominates the thinking and policies of the Russian state, including Russia's continuing war of aggression against Ukraine. Our journey starts in Leningrad of the 1970s, goes through the streets of East Germany in the 1980s, the ruins of the Soviet Union in the 1990s, and ends in the corridors of power inside the Kremlin of today. So sit back and enjoy this exploration of Putin's inner sanctum, while we discover who are the men of force that dominate Russian society. In December 1987, the Soviet Union celebrated its 65th birthday. Since its inception in 1922, the Soviet Union was the largest country in the world, with a population of over 200 million people. After World War II, the USSR built a network of allies and client states in Eastern Europe, the Caribbean and Africa. The Soviet Union was indisputably a global superpower, squaring off against the United States and its allies in a battle for world domination. However, by the late 1980s, all was not well in the USSR. The workers' paradise promised by iconic figures like Lenin and Stalin had failed to materialize, and there was no ideological consensus on how the world's leading communist state should continue on its path to socialism. Their rivals in the capitalist West, far from collapsing into revolution, had continued to develop and delivered a degree of personal freedom with material wealth for their citizens that was the envy of their counterparts in the Eastern Bloc. By contrast, the Soviet Union was a society in decay. Control over the political, social and economic life in the country was tightly controlled by a vast intelligence and security apparatus. They broke up opposition movements, jailed dissenters, and secured the position of the communists as the only legal political entity in the country. Although not a clearly defined group of people, the Silaviki were made up of leading figures from the KGB and other agencies that supported the continuation of the Soviet state. However, in 1985, a young reformer called Mikhail Gorbachev became first secretary of the Soviet Communist Party. Gorbachev was politically committed to the party and to the country, but he recognized the long-term prospects of the USSR were not good without making significant reforms. He scaled back the arms race with the West that was bankrupting the country and began to engage with the US about reducing nuclear weapons in Europe. He introduced groundbreaking reforms which became known as glasnost, or openness, and perestroika, which translated to reconstruction. These reforms legalized political dissent, began to open up the economy, and paved the way for national identities frozen for decades to re-emerge once again. However, Gorbachev's policies were met with resistance from Siloviki hardliners who considered his reforms a betrayal. This opposition culminated in the August 1991 coup attempt, which was an attempt to forcibly seize control of the country from Gorbachev. The coup leaders consisted of top military and civilian officials from the Silaviki, including Vice President Gennady Yanayev. They opposed Gorbachev's reform program, were angry at the loss of control over Eastern European states, and fearful of the USSR's new Union Treaty, which was on the verge of being signed. The treaty was to decentralize much of the Central Soviet government's power and distribute it amongst its 15 republics. The hardliners dispatched KGB agents who detained Gorbachev at his holiday estate, but failed to detain the recently elected president of the newly reconstituted Russia, Boris Yeltsin, who'd been both an ally and a critic of Gorbachev. The coup was badly organized and met with effective resistance by both Yeltsin and a civilian campaign of anti-authoritarian protesters, mainly centered in Moscow. The coup attempt collapsed in 2 days, and Gorbachev returned to office while the plotters all lost their posts. Yeltsin subsequently became the dominant leader, and Gorbachev lost much of his influence. The failed coup led to both the immediate collapse of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union and the dissolution of the USSR 4 months later. These moves prompted resistance and suspicion on the part of hardline members of the Soviet state. The reforms also caused nationalist agitation on the part of the Soviet Union's non-Russian minorities to grow, and there were fears that some or all of these Union republics might secede. In 1991, the Soviet Union was in a severe economic and political crisis. Scarcity of food, medicine, and other consumables was widespread. People had to stand in long lines to buy even essential goods. Fuel stocks were as much as 50% lower than the estimated amount needed for the approaching winter, and inflation exceeded 300% per year, with factories lacking the cash needed to pay salaries. The coup was the last gasp attempt of those who were astonished and felt betrayed by the ignominious collapse of the Soviet Empire in Eastern Europe and the swift dissolution of the Warsaw Pact that followed. Many feared the consequences of Gorbachev's German policies above all, not just for leaving officers unemployed, but for sacrificing gains achieved in the Great Patriotic War. The failed coup attempt marked the end of the first chapter in the history of the Silaviki. Although Gorbachev's reforms were intended to save the Soviet Union, they unleashed the forces that would ultimately destroy it. The early 1990s saw a dramatic downgrade in the influence and power of the Russian security apparatus. The feared KGB, which once held the Soviet state together in a vice-like grip, survived, but rebranded as the FSB. The dramatic series of economic crises that ravaged Russia during the 1990s took a heavy toll on the once formidable Siloviki. Future Russian President Vladimir Putin is reported to have moonlighted as a taxi driver in St. Petersburg in order to make ends meet during this period. There were even rumours that part of the KGB's former headquarters had been rented out to a laundromat. The armed forces fared even worse. The new armed forces of the Russian Federation struggled with the collapse in funding, rampant corruption and low morale. Disastrous campaigns in Chechnya further helped underline the precipitous decline of the power of the army since its heyday in the Soviet Union. As the power of the security forces declined in the early 1990s, a new caste of power brokers emerged in the country, the Oligarchs. As economic turmoil ravaged the country, a new elite of fabulously wealthy individuals began to fill the void left by the Silaviki. The country's chaotic transition to a market economy opened opportunities for both old party officials and younger entrepreneurs to make obscene amounts of money, even as poverty and hardship ravaged the life of ordinary Russians. These individuals included Chelsea Football Club owner Roman Abramovich and exiled billionaire Mikhail Khodorkovsky. These people all had major connections to power structures within the Soviet Union before its demise, and leveraged those connections to enrich themselves in the new capitalist economy. However, the wealth and political power of the oligarchs attracted enemies all across Russia. When Vladimir Putin became Prime Minister in 1999, the power of the Silaviki and the Russian security state began to re-emerge once again. Many wealthy and powerful Russian businessmen, such as Khodorkovsky, were arrested for crimes such as tax evasion and fraud, charges that are widely acknowledged to have been politically motivated. In a country that had endured years of economic hardship under what Putin denounced as oligarch capitalism, his measures had widespread public support. The re-emergence of the Silaviki was painted as a stabilizing influence, a reassertion of government control in a country that endured years of gangsterism and rampant corruption. This campaign culminated in the early 2000s with Putin's so-called grand bargain. Oligarchs would be allowed to keep their billions, but in exchange for complete loyalty to Putin and for an abstention from all political matters. In the 20 years since the power of the oligarchs was broken, Putin has consolidated his control of the Russian state and over the resurgent Silaviki. The Silaviki has never been a defined group of people with a clear membership. It's always been a collection of officials from the various security agencies without a cohesive agenda. However, there are certain common themes and ideas that bind the Silaviki together. First is a bitter resentment towards the former President Mikhail Gorbachev and the manner in which the USSR fell. They see it as something that was entirely avoidable and was a disaster for many of them personally, as well as for many former Soviet citizens. They've actively tried to encourage the view that they're a non-ideologically minded group of law and order hawks. However, this couldn't be further from the truth. What unites all Silaviki is the firm belief in Russian exceptionalism as a great and powerful country. They believe in Russia's rightful inheritance to the Soviet Union's superpower status. Despite lacking the size, population or influence the Soviet Union had, the Silaviki are committed to reconstructing its power in the world and its hold over its neighbours. Failure to adhere to these beliefs is now a disqualifying factor in the shadowy world of Russian security. As Putin consolidated his hold over the Russian state in the coming years, an inner circle of Siloviki loyalists came to dominate the Russian state and society. The first of these shadowy figures is Alexander Bortnikov, who's been head of the FSB since 2008. An old KGB friend of Putin's, the two have known each other since being stationed in Leningrad together back in the 1970s. The New York Times alleges that Bortnikov was instrumental in the 2007 operation to murder Russian dissident Alexander Litvinenko in London. Under the leadership of Bortnikov, the FSB has rediscovered the worst instincts and tactics of the KGB, including political repression, subversion, and murder. He courted further controversy in 2007 after appearing to legitimize the Stalinist purges carried out by the KGB's forerunner, the Cheka. He appeared to claim that the show trials that condemned thousands of innocent people had a, quote, objective side to them. Bortnikov has a typical Siloviki mentality, firmly rooted in the 1970s world that he and Putin joined the KGB in. He sees the world through the lens of competing power blocks between East and West, with Ukraine residing firmly within the Russian sphere of influence. He apparently created the expectation that Ukrainians would welcome Russian troops as liberators, a belief that was badly exposed in February 2022. Probably the most extreme of Putin's inner sanctum is Nikolai Patrushev. An ultra-hardline hawk amongst hawks, Patrushev is another KGB alumni that first worked with Putin and Bortnikov in Leningrad in the 70s. What sets Patrushev apart is his willingness to embrace wild conspiracy theories to justify extreme actions and explain world events. The 2014 Ukrainian Revolution is considered by Patrushev to have been orchestrated by the United States, whom he claims would prefer Russia not to exist at all. He has long railed against what he calls the Anglo-Saxon attempts to undermine and destroy Russia. Patrushev is not shy about giving interviews. His many interviews and essays reveal his often bizarre and conspiratorial way of thinking. In April 2022, Patrushev gave an interview to the Russian newspaper Rossiya Gazeta. He began with his favourite topic, the evil intentions of the West in general and the United States in particular. During the interview, Patrushev talks about a made-up criminal community who fled Ukraine and who are now engaged in the widespread business of the sale of orphans taken out of the country. Meanwhile, the West, Patrushev asserts, has already revived the shadow market for the purchase of human organs from the socially vulnerable segments of the Ukrainian population for clandestine transplant operations for European patients. The West, Patrushev asserts, is continuing to support Ukrainian neo-Nazis by continuing to supply Ukraine with weapons. In Patrushev's worldview, the West seeks to reduce the world's population in various ways, one of which is the creation of an empire of lies involving the humiliation and the destruction of Russia and other objectionable states. Patrushev also told the national newspaper Izvestia that to understand what is really going on in Ukraine and the world, one should look at the supervolcano called Yellowstone Caldera in Wyoming. Geologists explained that the last eruption of the volcano happened more than 600,000 years ago and had catastrophic consequences all over North America. Patrushev believes that Americans are aware that the Yellowstone caldera has been showing increasing signs of volcanic activity in recent years, and when it erupts, it is believed that all forms of life in North America will inevitably die off, but not Russia. For this reason, Patrushev revealed, some in America and Europe believe that Eastern Europe and Siberia would be the safest places to take refuge in the event of a potential eruption. This is why the Anglo-Saxons want to take possession of Ukraine and Russia itself. They will need to move there after Yellowstone erupts. Needless to say, Patrushev's comments have attracted widespread mockery and derision online. It would be easy to dismiss Patrushev's comments as the ramblings of an out-of-touch conspiracy theorist, but what makes Patrushev especially dangerous is his close relationship to Vladimir Putin. With such a high degree of personal access to the Russian president, Patrushev has been instrumental in shaping Putin's conspiratorial view of the world, and has been key in starting the narrative that Ukraine is run by Nazis, a bizarre conspiracy theory that has been at the core of Russia's invasion. Completing the trio of old Leningrad spooks, Sergei Naryshkin has remained alongside the president for much of his career. Narushkin acts as the head of Russia's foreign intelligence service and forms a key part of Vladimir Putin's Siloviki inner circle. Despite being confronted by the CIA about the expected invasion of Ukraine, in November 2021, Narushkin dismissed the reports of a possible invasion, asserting that it was malicious propaganda by the US State Department. Days before Russia invaded Ukraine in February 2022, Narushkin received widespread attention in the global press for visibly trembling and stuttering uncontrollably, as Putin humiliated him for fumbling his response to the Russian president's questioning during a Security Council meeting of Russia concerning the abandonment of the Minsk agreements and recognizing the Russian-backed separatist regions of Donetsk and Luhansk. The lengthy session was edited, so the Kremlin had clearly decided to show his discomfort in front of a huge television audience. Investigative journalist Andrei Soldatov said, "Putin loves playing games with his inner circle, making Narushkin look a fool. The intention of the staged, scripted event was for Putin to publicly tie his inner circle of Silaviki to the invasion of Ukraine, so nobody could afterwards claim to have opposed the unprecedented breach of international law." The rare public display of dissent might suggest that perhaps there are high-ranking members of the Silaviki that are opposing Russia's actions. However, since then, Narushkin appears to have fallen back into line. In 2023, at a security forum outside Moscow attended by foreign security officials, Sergei Naryshkin made some of his most anti-Western comments yet, saying that the West had sown the seeds of its own destruction by turning away from what he called its core traditions, and told the West to go to the devil and to stop interfering in global affairs. He continued, "It's pertinent to remember the biblical truth. The end of them will be according to their deeds, and that means that their end will be a sad one," he said, saying that the West was riven by serious internal and external problems. Other dishonorable mentions include Igor Sechin, CEO of the Russian state oil giant Rosneft, who's been nicknamed Darth Vader and called the scariest man on earth by the Russian media. A leaked US embassy cable described him as the Grey Cardinal of the Kremlin. Sechin has risen to power from obscurity to become one of Putin's closest allies. He's known for his significant business deals as well as his legal battles with Russian newspapers. His enigmatic and authoritative presence is underpinned by a supposed passion for big game hunting and jazz music. The architect of the Russian invasion is another firm Siloviki member, Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation, Sergey Shoygu. Shoigu was born on the 21st of May 1955 in a small town in the remote poverty-stricken Republic of Tuva, deep in the southern heartlands of Siberia. Unlike most other members of the Silaviki, Shoigu's background is not in security, the KGB, or even the military. In 1988, Shoigu entered politics after he was made second secretary of the Abakan City Communist Party Committee, the capital of the Republic of Khakazia. This would prove to be the beginning of a long career, Shoigu moving through 4 jobs in just 6 years before becoming a minister within the Kremlin. In 1994, he was made the Minister of Civil Defense, Emergencies and Disaster Relief, a post that he would keep until 2012. He held a string of other roles in this time too, including Deputy Prime Minister, leader of the Unity Party, as well as leader of the United Russia Party, the party in which Putin is considered the de facto leader. It was during this time as leader of the Unity Party that Shoigu grew close to Putin, as the party acted as an outlet for the rise of the later Russian president to acquire a political circle and gain trust among future Kremlin leaders. He went on to work with Putin for 20 years, the two acquiring not only a professional but a personal relationship, becoming close friends and going on regular hunting trips. Experts suggest that Shoigu was rewarded for his loyalty and friendship in 2012 when Putin, at the beginning of his second presidential term, made him governor of Moscow Oblast, a sought-after title. His dedication to a Russia fueled by nationalism paid off yet again later that year when he was made Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation, which placed him directly in charge of Russia's armed forces. Shoigu is the man who would have overseen Russia's momentous build-up of troops along Ukraine's border in the year leading up to February 24, 2022. Shoigu's obvious lack of relevant military experience for a defence minister drew consternation and derision from high-ranking people within the armed forces. This lack of experience was laid bare during Russia's disastrous 2022 invasion of Ukraine. It doesn't take a military expert to see that this was not a campaign conceived of by a professional soldier. The Russian invasion force was far too small, too ill-equipped, and lacked a cohesive strategic vision to stand a chance of achieving the hopelessly unrealistic objectives laid out by Putin and other members of the Silaviki. It was hoped that the failings of Moscow's much smaller opponent would be enough to offset any oversights on the part of Shoigu and his army. However, as the campaign quickly floundered, the limitations of Shoigu and his lack of professional experience as a soldier became obvious to the world. The close relationship he once enjoyed with the Russian President Vladimir Putin quickly began to show signs of strain, as Shoigu seemed to disappear from the public eye, prompting speculation that he'd been purged or was experiencing health issues, only for him to re-emerge sometime later. Although evidence suggests from videos such as this that his relationship with Putin is far more strained than he once enjoyed. Just like other members of Putin's inner circle, little is known about Shoigu's contemporary personal life. Although in a display of hypocrisy that has become typical of the Russian elite, his daughter has been seen enjoying a privileged life in the West, with regular trips to the UK, Italy and Dubai featured on her Instagram. Sergey Lavrov is a prominent figure in Russian diplomacy, serving as Russia's foreign minister since 2004. Born in Georgia and educated at the Moscow State Institute of International Relations, Lavrov is known for his flawless language skills and remarkable memory. During his tenure as foreign minister, Lavrov was initially viewed positively by the West, being seen as a man of principle and an effective orator. He even shared camaraderie with the former US Secretary of State John Kerry during diplomatic talks on Syria. However, as Russia's foreign minister, Lavrov has taken on a more confrontational role, delivering President Vladimir Putin's messages to the world. He has made controversial statements, including denying Russia's attack on Ukraine and accusing the West of planning a nuclear strike on Russia. Lavrov has also faced criticism for defending Russia's actions and justifying decisions deemed tragic and catastrophic. Lavrov's personal life has also come under scrutiny, with allegations of hidden wealth and relationships. Reports suggest that he may have profited from his association with Putin and may have maintained a second unofficial wife alongside his long-standing marriage. Despite his long-standing position, Lavrov's influence appears to have diminished within Putin's inner circle. Some speculate that he may have been considering resigning, but various factors, including the deaths of high-level diplomats and changes in his reputation, have reportedly discouraged such a move. Lavrov is another regular denouncer of the West, whose own children have been seen enjoying a privileged lifestyle in London and New York. Of course, there's also the Siloviki chief, Vladimir Putin. His career began in the Soviet Union's main security agency, the KGB, where he spent 16 years from 1975 to 1991, predominantly in its foreign intelligence arm. His time in the KGB gave him valuable experience in security matters, intelligence, and arguably decision-making. From 1985 to 1990, Putin served as a KGB officer in the East German city of Dresden. The secretive nature of the KGB's work has left plenty of space for rumours and romanticised stories to take root down the years about what the young Vladimir Putin might have been involved with. Some of his supporters have even sought to explain the odd walk he has today as being a habit he developed in the KGB that made the firearm he was supposedly carrying more accessible if he was ever involved in a sudden shootout. But far from being a sort of Soviet James Bond, the evidence from the period suggests that much like Putin himself, his time there was largely unremarkable. Far from all the action in East Berlin, Dresden was something of a provincial backwater from an espionage perspective. It's likely he spent the bulk of his time writing and filing meaningless reports and attending dull parties that were designed to highlight the ties between East Germany and the Soviet Union. Upon returning to Russia from East Germany after the fall of the Berlin Wall, Putin arrived back into a country that was fundamentally different from the one he'd left. During the early 1990s, he began his transition from intelligence officer to political leader, setting the stage for his ascension to the presidency in 1999. The unveiling of a bust in honor of Yuri Andropov, the late head of the KGB and Soviet leader, offers some insight into Putin's mindset. While some older citizens recall Andropov's time as a period of discipline and order, others, particularly younger Russians, view his return as a symbolic resurgence of the Silaviki influence. President Vladimir Putin, a former FSB chief, has expressed admiration for Andropov's commitment to restoring Soviet pride and power. Critics claim that Putin's admiration for Andropov signals an alignment with an authoritarian style of governance and a reduction in democratic freedoms. They point to Putin's reinstatement of a plaque honouring Andropov at the former KGB headquarters, his crackdown in Chechnya, and the suppression of independent television and political debate as evidence. Moreover, Putin's handling of the trial of Russia's wealthiest man, Mikhail Khodorkovsky, for tax evasion and fraud is seen as a litmus test for Russia's democratic values and Putin's intent to continue Andropov's style of rule. As Putin continued his rise to power, so did the influence of the Siloviki. Under his leadership, the Siloviki broke the power of the oligarchs and have consolidated significant controls over various areas of the Russian government, economy and security. This system has helped Putin maintain a strong grip on power, providing a network of loyalists that ensure his policies are implemented and his rule remains uncontested. Putin's journey from intelligence community to the head of the Silaviki is a unique story of power acquisition and consolidation. His intelligence background has significantly influenced his leadership style and political strategies. His strategic placement of the Silaviki within the Russian government and economy has allowed Putin to create a system of power and control that has withstood political and economic challenges over 2 decades. His rule is a testament to his political acumen, his decision-making, and the powerful role of the Silaviki in contemporary Russian politics. As we approach the end of this deep dive into the Silaviki, Russia's powerful security and military elites, we find ourselves facing some daunting realities. These figures, deeply entrenched in the Russian power structure, are facing increasing international pressure and scrutiny due to the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. Several key Russian businessmen, like Roman Abramovich and Mikhail Friedman, are feeling the brunt of Western sanctions, resulting in significant disruptions to their international business interests. However, the wider Russian elite, which include the Silaviki, seem to lack the necessary institutions or identities to effectively challenge Putin's authority, let alone unseat him. The pressure mounting against Putin's elite could also potentially come from an unexpected source: their own children. Many of them, raised in the West and accustomed to its freedoms, are expressing discontent with the current state of affairs, similar to Elizaveta Peskova, the daughter of Putin's press spokesman, Dmitry Peskov, who voiced her protest against the war on Instagram. The Silaviki are seen as deeply corrupt, but intriguingly, they self-justify their immense personal wealth as a form of patriotism. They perceive their wealth as a means to uphold their status as representatives of the government, viewing any comparative poverty as a slight against the Russian state itself. Their corruption is thus intertwined with a deep-seated desire to maintain public order, power, and property, all of which they believe are crucial to prevent Russia from slipping into the chaos that characterized the 1990s. The Silaviki and Putin seem to enjoy the sympathy of a significant portion of the Russian population, many of whom remain resentful about their perceived betrayal during the turbulent 1990s. This population seems supportive of a regime that echoes their own frustrations and ambitions, providing a base of support for the Silaviki. Increasingly, Putin and the Silaviki appear to be drawing inspiration from the Chinese model of governance, which combines economic dynamism, societal discipline, and a robust military power overseen by a powerful patriotic elite. They might welcome isolation from the West if it pushes Russia closer to China, despite the risk of becoming a Beijing dependency. The Russian establishment, spearheaded by the Silaviki, is committed to the idea of Russia as a major global power. They see the struggle over Ukraine as an embodiment of this belief and a critical element in their geopolitical strategy. In their eyes, without Ukraine, Russia would cease to be a Eurasian empire, and they would be prepared to fight relentlessly to avoid that outcome. So as we wrap up this exploration into the world of the Silaviki, Let's reflect on the complex tapestry of power, nationalism and corruption that emerged from today's discussion. What are your thoughts on the motivations of the Silaviki? How do you see their influence shaping the future of Russia and its relationship with the world? Please share your thoughts and opinions in the comments below. We would love to hear from you. Remember, conversations like this help to broaden our collective understanding of these intricate geopolitical networks. As always, if you found this video insightful, do hit the like button and subscribe to RedWatch TV for more in-depth analysis. Until next time, keep watching, and remember, knowledge is our first line of defense.